Have you ever heard of a king so mysterious that his story is shrouded in riddles? He appeared before Abraham, blessed the patriarch, and then vanished from the pages of Scripture. Who was Melchizedek, this priest-king who appears without genealogy and without end? What role did he play in God's plan, and why is he remembered in both the Old and New Testaments? Today we will uncover everything about this fascinating figure, who carries deep symbols of royalty and priesthood. But before we begin, I invite those who haven't subscribed to our channel to do so and turn on notifications so you don't miss new content. Imagine Abraham returning from a great battle. He was exhausted but victorious, with a grateful heart for having rescued his nephew Lot and defeated 4 powerful kings. The dry desert wind blew across his face, bringing a sense of relief but also a weight. The victory was his, but deep down, he knew that none of it would have been possible without God's hand guiding every step. Then suddenly, in the midst of that seemingly lonely desert, a figure appeared. It was a mysterious man dressed like a king but with a different aura. He wasn't just any king. He came in peace, bringing bread and wine, symbolic and sacred gestures. This man, whose name was Melchizedek, was the king of Salem and also a priest of the Most High God. Who was he? What brought him to meet Abraham at this peculiar moment in his journey? Abraham, a man accustomed to wars, victories, and defeats, was prepared for many challenges, but perhaps not for an encounter like this. Seeing Melchizedek approaching, Abraham must have felt something different in the air. There was a solemnity in that moment that transcended earthly battles. Without provocation, Melchizedek came to bless him. Imagine Abraham's surprise at seeing this mysterious king, a priest, greeting him and offering bread and wine. That simple gesture carried enormous spiritual depth. It wasn't just an act of hospitality, it was something greater, something sacred. Abraham, who walked in a foreign land with few alliances and many enemies, found there a friend in God. A man who recognized the same God he served, the Most High God, creator of heaven and earth. The emotion Abraham must have felt was intense. There he stood at the height of his victory, receiving a blessing that reaffirmed that all he had achieved was not by his own hands, but by the power of God. What might Abraham have felt at that moment? Perhaps a mix of humility and gratitude. He who had heard such grand promises from God was now blessed by a priest of that same God, an unknown man, yet one who carried immense spiritual authority. Little is known about Melchizedek. His appearance in the Bible is brief but deeply significant. He is called King of Salem and Priest of the Most High God, an unusual combination at the time. Normally, kings were rulers focused on political and military power, while priests were responsible for spiritual matters. However, Melchizedek held both roles. How did he come to this position? Where did his spiritual authority come from, and why was he, of all men, chosen to bless Abraham? Melchizedek appears almost supernaturally. He has no recorded genealogy. We don't know who his parents were or where he came from. It's as if he appeared out of nowhere, sent by God at a specific moment to fulfill a divine purpose. That alone would be enough to cause wonder, but what intrigues us more is the fact that he was a priest of the Most High God, the same God that Abraham served. Did Abraham know there were other servants of God scattered across that land? Or was Melchizedek a divine surprise, proof that God was working everywhere, even when Abraham thought he was alone in his faith? When Melchizedek blesses Abraham, he says, "Blessed be Abraham by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hands." Genesis 14 verses 19 to 20. Those words must have resonated deeply in Abraham's heart. He knew God had promised him great things, but to hear from another's lips, from a priest of the Most High God, that his victories were a direct result of divine intervention, reinforced his faith. And what Abraham does next is even more significant. He, the great patriarch, the man who had been promised to be the father of many nations, bows before Melchizedek and gives him a tithe of everything he possessed. This act was not merely symbolic. It was a recognition of Melchizedek's spiritual authority, and more than that, a declaration that everything he had achieved belonged to God. Did Abraham feel small before God's greatness at that moment? He who had just defeated powerful kings, now acknowledged that all his victories were the result of God's grace. And this recognition came through Melchizedek, a man he barely knew, but who carried the divine presence with him. Centuries later, the author of Hebrews would make a fascinating connection between Melchizedek and Jesus. In Hebrews 7, we read that Melchizedek was without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life. Resembling the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. Hebrews 7 verse 3. This raises an intriguing question. Was Melchizedek just a man, or was he a foreshadowing of something greater, something eternal? The writer of Hebrews sees in Melchizedek a shadow of Christ. Just as Melchizedek was both king and priest, Jesus is also our eternal king and priest. But unlike Melchizedek, Jesus is the ultimate priest, who intercedes for us before God. Did Abraham in that encounter catch a glimpse of what was to come? Did he sense that this meeting was more than just a blessing, but a prelude to something greater, to a redemption that would come centuries later through Christ? Melchizedek's story challenges us to think about how God reveals himself in unexpected ways in our lives. Abraham was at the height of a military victory, but it was in that moment of rest, away from the battle, that he found true blessing. How often are we so focused on our struggles and achievements that we forget to recognize the unexpected blessings God places in our path? Melchizedek reminds us that God is always working, even when we don't realize it. He meets us in unexpected moments, often through people or situations we didn't expect. Are we ready to recognize these divine visits in our lives? Are we prepared to hear the words of blessing that God desires to give us, often through messengers we don't always understand or know? Just as Abraham, we too are called to recognize that all our victories come from God. Nothing we achieve is by our own strength or merit. Everything is the result of divine grace, of God's hand guiding our lives. And just as Abraham gave a tithe to Melchizedek, we are also called to honor God with everything we have, acknowledging that everything comes from him. Melchizedek's story leads us to reflect on the mystery of faith and how God operates in ways that go beyond our understanding. It reminds us that God is always present, often through unexpected figures, blessing and guiding us. Just as Abraham was blessed by Melchizedek, we are called to be open to the blessings God desires to pour out on us, even in the moments we least expect. And most importantly, this story points us to Christ, the eternal priest who intercedes for us. Melchizedek was a glimpse of what was to come, a shadow of the great priest who would bring true redemption. May we, like Abraham, recognize God's greatness in our lives and live in humility, gratitude, and devotion to the Most High God, the Creator of heaven and earth.